and our guest, Aram Han Sifuentes. Aram is a fiber, social practice, and performance artist who works to claim spaces for immigrant and disenfranchised communities. Her work often revolves around skill sharing, specifically sewing techniques, to create multi-ethnic and intergenerational sewing circles, which become a place for empowerment, subversion, and protest. Her work has been exhibited at the Pulitzer Arts Foundation, Jane Addams Hull House Museum, Hyde Park Art Center, Chicago Cultural Center, Asian Arts Initiative, Chung-Yung Yang Embroidery Museum, and the Design Museum in London. Aram is a 2016 Smithsonian Artist Research Fellow, a 2016 Three Arts Awardee, and a 2017 Sustainable Arts Foundation Awardee. She is currently an adjunct assistant professor at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. We have greatly enjoyed your energy, thoughts, and feedback in the studio, and as well as your amazing stories about your pet leeches. So thank you so much for being here with us, and please join me in welcoming Aram.
Thank you for the introduction, and thank you, Mark, for inviting me here. So I'm just going to jump right into it. So the President of the United States, Donald Trump, has waged war on many groups of people, including immigrants, and particularly immigrants of color. So Trump and his administration have signed executive orders to build a wall along the entirety of the southern border, hire 15,000 additional border and interior enforcement officers, eliminate sanctuary cities, ban visitors, immigrants, and refugees from select Muslim-majority countries, enhanced immigration enforcement by arresting and deporting non-citizens who do not have criminal records or pose a danger to society, enforcing zero tolerance at the border where any person crossing is criminally prosecuted. And as part of this, migrant children were separated from their parents. Cut back on programs by reducing refugee admissions to the lowest level since the resettlement program was created in 1980, ending DACA, ending the designation of temporary protected status for nationals of Haiti, Nicaragua, Sudan, Nepal, El Salvador, Honduras, increase vetting and obstacles for illegal immigration by no longer accepting victims of domestic and gang violence as eligible for asylum, significantly increasing the numbers of interviews applicants must undergo prior to being approved for immigration or travel to the United States, suspending the visa interview waiver program, increasing the amount of information visa applicants must provide, signing Buy American and Hire American executive order to protect the interests of U.S. workers and to prevent fraud and abuse in the immigration system. They further traumatize immigrants by proposing to deny non-citizens of legal status to those who have ever used or whose household members have ever used Obamacare, children's health insurance, food stamps, and other benefits, revoking passports of Mexican descent living along the Rio Grande, born with a presence of a midwife or born in community health centers, putting children of deported parents up for adoption, is preparing an executive order that would end birthright citizenship, declared national security at the border, and many more. So Trump and his administration have made it clear that immigrants of color are not welcome because we are the problem. We're living in a moment where the detention, deportation, and violence against immigrants are normalized with no end in sight. We are not safe. So who gets to sit comfortably in the center and who are positioned as the other? Othering is nothing new and has historically been done to push certain racialized, gendered, and sexualized people's lives to the periphery where lives become unprotectable and deaths become ungrievable. So in this moment, to respond to this moment, I created this monumental banner of 13 by 25 feet to remind us that we are never, never other, because we're in a moment where even simple statements like that need to be said out loud and asserted. So I start here because my goal as an artist is to disrupt unsettle, and rupture a dominant narrative to assert, demand, and claim space for those who are commonly othered, particularly for immigrants of color. We are never, never other. Especially in this moment, we have to put ourselves in the center. So I learned to sew when I was 6 years old, and that was the year we moved to the United States from South Korea. So my parents came here without knowing what they would do for work, and luckily someone in the small Korean community in the Central Valley in California hired them to work at their dry cleaning business. So this is my father's hands. He works the machines, cleaning, pressing, spotting, and ironing, and my mother hems and alters clothes. My parents were able to open up their own dry cleaning business, and they still do this work today. It's my mom's hands. So my parents work 12, 13 hours a day at work, 6 days a week, and my mom always brings sewing work home with her. So I'd estimate that she works about 15 hours a day, 6 days a week. And they've been doing this for 27 years now. We'd sit in the living room after dinner and watch TV as my mom would work on her alterations. Spending time with my mom meant sitting and sewing with her, so we would all contribute by ripping seams, ripping out bad zippers, sewing on buttons, mending rips and holes of other people's clothes. And this is where I learned to sew. And it's from here, from the beginning, where sewing became political for me and linked to my identity. And I always see sewing from this place, inside the living room, sewing with my family to make a living as immigrants in this country. So I went to UC Berkeley for my undergrad, and I studied Latin American studies with a focus on immigration policy. And so in the same living room is where I return time and time again. Sewing often gets associated as being women's work, a romantic narrative of women sewing at home for their families or in sewing circles. Or sewing gets associated with labor, and when speaking of labor, it often points to unionized textile garment workers or the disappearance of this industry to sweatshop laborers overseas. So in this living room, I started to question, where does my family's history fit in? The current labor that is happening in poor, racialized immigrant homes like mine. So with this question here in the living room, I started to collect my mom's jean cuff remnants, which is the artifacts of the bulk of her work, because jeans are really long these days and people like me are really short. So I went off to Chicago to grad school to get my MFA at SAIC in fiber and material studies. So away from my mom, I wanted to visit those who do the same type of work in Chicago to question what we share and how others came to do this type of work. So I started to visit tailors and seamstresses in Chicago, and these are the scraps. So Lure of the American Dream draws many immigrants who arrive, who already know or quickly find out that their employment options are limited. Only 15% of immigrants enter through their employment-based preferences and get to enter the workforce here in their fields. The rest, usually because many immigrants do not speak English, or their credentials usually don't carry over to the United States, their employment options are limited. Many end up getting jobs that offer low wages, requires repetitive manual labor, and are sometimes hazardous with no union or collective bargaining protections. So these tailors and seamstresses, like my mom, work long and tedious hours and oftentimes takes extra work home or to places where work is unregulated. So in the book, Ruptures of American Capital, Grace Kyung-Wong Hong speaks to how in a post-Fordist era, the domestic space is built as a private space that's supposed to be free from the surveillance of capitalism. But with work entering the home, if one is lucky enough to even possess a home, the homes of these women of color and immigrant families become an infected and contaminated space. So while collecting jean cuffs, I asked, where did you immigrate? How long have you been in the United States? How long have you worked as a seamstress or tailor? What type of work did you do before? How much do you charge to hem a pair of jeans? And this chart reflects their answer. So it's very difficult to immigrate to this country legally, illegally as well. That's another conversation. So immigrants who are granted visas and green cards are usually highly educated and skilled, so why are these nurses, businesswomen, graphic designers, bankers, artists, and teachers finding themselves sewing jeans for $10 to $20 a piece for over 12 hours a day? So some say my parents should be appreciative of the opportunities given to them. I don't see it this way. I see it as an exploitation of immigrants to keep the cost of handwork and manual labor low in this country. So where the previous project amend asked the question, who do we allow in the United States? My project, the US Citizenship Test Sampler, asks, who should be granted citizenship and how do they prove themselves? So why I'm calling it samplers is because I'm riffing off of traditional colonial samplers that were used in the United States during the 18th and 19th century, and played multifunctional social roles. So teachers would teach their students as young as 5 or 6 to embroider. As you could see, they were embroidering the alphabet and numbers. So in this way, they were also learning basic educational concepts. And some girls, generally from wealthy families that were able to continue their education, they would oftentimes create a second sampler in their adolescent years. And you can see it doesn't have that same sort of format, but it's much more decorative and pictorial. And it functioned as a signifier of the accomplishments of the young lady and revealed the values of the girl and her family to potential suitors. So by dedicating herself to create such a time-consuming sampler, she was proving her obedience, patience, and skillfulness in woman's work, thus showcasing her worth as a wife. So riffing off of that history, I decided to create a US Citizenship Test Sampler, where I'm stitching the 100 civics questions and answers of the citizenship test. So there's 100 questions you have to study, and from those 100, they pick 10, and you have to get 6 or more right, and it's an oral test. So this embroidery is 8.5 inches wide and about 25 feet long, and it's linen, and I'm using cotton thread. So I started this project because of practical motivations. I wasn't a citizen, and I had to learn the test material for the nationalization test. So like the traditional samplers, I was using it to learn educational information. So the project follows 5 guidelines. 1, to sell the sampler for the cost of applying for citizenship. I sold it for $680, but now the fee has gone up to $725 to apply. Number 2, to log my hours of stitching the sampler. So because my sampler was sold for $680 and I was on question 53 with almost 300 hours that I put into it, I made about $2 an hour. And this speaks to how hand and immigrant labor are undervalued in our society. Number 3, to apply for citizenship only if my sampler sells. So by making my application for citizenship contingent on the sale of the samplers, I was letting others decide if I've proven my worthiness of becoming a citizen. And with the sale of my sampler, I became a citizen last year. Number 4, to engage other non-citizens to each stitch one of the civics questions and answers. So each of these are 8.5 by 11, also on linen. Number 5, to exhibit and sell the samplers, and each work is on sale for $725, the cost of applying for citizenship, and the full amount goes to the makers of the sold samplers. So I only asked participants to stitch their question and answer. However, one of my first participants asked me if he could add more because he didn't think it would sell for $680. So since then, many sampler makers have been adding pictorial elements of their own choosing and making judgments of their own invested labor. So currently there's more than 120 completed samplers, and these samplers are exhibited together to display the collective value of this community of non-citizens. And like I said, all of them are on sale for $725. So in some instances, I work one-on-one with participants, and based on their individual and educational needs to pass the citizenship test, I become a private tutor for both English and the civics questions. So I've been facilitating citizenship-ready workshops at nonprofit organizations, community centers, and schools all over the United States, where communities of non-citizen immigrants come together to learn the citizenship test material through the act of sewing. The sampler workshops organically become these grassroots roundtable discussions addressing immigrant rights, labor politics, and everyday concerns of intergenerational and multi-ethnic people. So I'm interested in the various ways this project gets interpreted. So some see the act of non-citizens studying American history and government through a traditional American craft as patriotic, while others interpret this project as politically confrontational where the act of stitching these samplers by non-citizens represents a political appropriation of a text that's inherently condescending of the immigrant community. And sewing is a gesture linked to the types of work that immigrants currently do. So in this way, the politics of the project exists simultaneously as patriotic and as political dissent and critique. At the core of this project is a critique of the US immigration and naturalization test and the vulnerability of immigrants navigating their way through the process. The citizenship test is ridiculous. So USA News did a study in 2012 that showed that 1 in 3 Americans failed the citizenship test. And this comes up every workshop. I'm gonna do a pop quiz. So so it's 10 questions, and you have to get 6 or more right. It's an oral test, so I'll ask 5 questions, and you have to get 3 or more right. I'm gonna pick the harder questions, because this is higher education. So, who was president during World War I? Don't oh my God me, come on. Yes, Woodrow Wilson. How many members are in the House of Representatives? Just holla. I heard many wrong answers and 1 correct answer. We'll go with the correct one. It's 435. What year was the Constitution written? Okay, I'm just gonna say that was wrong. 1787. Let me see. Okay, and what is the rule of law? Remember, it's an oral test. What is the rule of law? No. So the rule of law is that nobody is above the law. Does Trump know the rule of law? And last question, also wording is kind of funny. What happened at the Constitutional Convention? No. The Constitution was written. Right? So like some of these, the wording is like very strange. You guys got 2 wrong, so you passed. Congratulations, citizens. So this comes up every workshop, right? Why do I have to know these things to prove that I am worthy of becoming a citizen? So as individuals and as a community, we non-citizens do not have the freedom to voice our protest of the conditions put upon us as immigrants without fear of repercussions, right? So one of the requirements of becoming a citizen, it says, word for word, to be of good moral character, right? So if you're convicted of even minor crimes, you're not eligible to become a citizen, or they can use that against you. So this is a political project that deals with questions of time, labor, work, economy, capitalism, and patriotism. So from start to finish, it's about reclaiming the historical act of making samplers. The act of making samplers in and of themselves are about assessing value, the value of the skills of the woman making them. And that assessment of handwork is lost in this industrial age, where embroidery and handcrafts are made by these so-called invisible laborers. So this project aims to reclaim this tradition and is reclaiming it for the racialized immigrant working class. So arts and crafts, like these sewing circles, are places of leisure and privilege. Immigrants do not often have time or access to do arts and crafts. So for example, most of the organizations and schools I occupy with these workshops make it clear to me that they don't do arts and crafts programs, that each and every workshop needs to fulfill educational components. So it's a policy that makes it clear that immigrants are always expected to work to prove ourselves. So why teach immigrants how to do arts and crafts when they need to spend that time to study English or computers or work toward their citizenship? So in this project, I create this space for non-citizens where we could stitch, make art together, study for a bullshit test, and make money from our work. So over 20 samplers have sold. Once the samplers sell, I contact the participants and offer my counsel if they need any assistance with their application or need any general legal help. And they get the money for whatever they need it for. They may never use it for citizenship, and that's okay because people are being paid for their work. So in 2016, like many, many, many others, I was just constantly following the news and thinking so much about the elections, really being worried about the future, worried about myself, my immigrant communities and neighbors and family. And I really wanted to vote, but I wasn't a citizen at the time, so I couldn't vote. So I became really obsessed with the elections and kind of decided that I had to vote. So I decided to make a project from it. So with that decision, I started to look at who are disenfranchised and how large are these populations in the United States. I was a bit surprised that it was hard for me to find, but this is the largest group to smallest in terms of people who are disenfranchised, who cannot legally vote. So youth under 18 is the biggest group, then non-citizens. Then it gets muddy very quickly because of state-by-state laws. So based on what state you're in, if you're incarcerated, you can't vote, and if you're an ex-felon in certain states, you can't vote. So the Sentencing Project estimated for the 2016 election that almost 6 million people couldn't vote because of these laws. So if we look at this more closely, like if you're in Maine or Vermont and in prison, you could still vote, right? But if you are in Illinois or Michigan, if you're in prison, you can't vote while you're there, but you could vote once you get out, right? Prison parole probation, and then in some of these stricter states, you lose your right forever. So Florida, for the 2016, that was one of the states where you lost your right forever, where you had to apply for clemency, but in 2019, they actually moved from the last column to prison parole probation. And with just Florida moving, that makes 1.4 million people eligible to vote now that previously couldn't. So in Kentucky, it's another one where the governor is the only one who could restore your right to vote. So in some of these strictest states like Kentucky and Virginia, more than 20% of the African American population cannot legally vote. The number 4, residents of US territories, even though they could vote in the primaries. And then number 5, again, state by state, there's different ID laws. So if you are living in a state that enforces strict ID laws and you don't have those IDs, then that makes you ineligible to vote. So this doesn't even address voter suppression. So looking at this number, I kept trying to find the total number and was unable to until after the 2016 election, actually, where this came out from the U.S. Election Project that estimated 28.6% of the population was ineligible to vote. So that's more than 1 in 4 people. That's 91.2 million people. So with such a large population, I wanted to make a project called the Official Unofficial Voting Station, Voting for All Who Legally Can't. But just creating one station wasn't enough. I wanted to create as many as possible in as many cities as possible. So luckily, I connected with the Jane Addams Hull House Museum in Chicago to do this project. So between September 8th and November 8th of 2016, I collaborated with more than 15 artists, activists, and organizations to create more than 25 different stations all over the US and in Mexico. So each of these voting stations took on different forms. Some were performative, used as pedagogical tools. They were public interactive artworks, events, guerrilla actions. And it wasn't meant to be a scientific demographic undertaking, but a series of interconnected gestures meant to empower disenfranchised people. So unfortunately, I can't show all of the stations, but here are some of my favorites. So Benny Lee, who was formerly on death row and who was acquitted, he heads the National Alliance for the Empowerment of the Formerly Incarcerated. He took ballots into prisons in Illinois and had incarcerated votes. Performance artist, co-founder of La Pocha Nostra, husband Roberto Sifuentes, asked his students in his performance class called Border Crossers at the School of Art Institute Chicago to create their own voting stations. So here, Frida and Jesus Hilario, they used ballots to turn Frida into a walking ballot station human piñata. So another example is Cecilia Aguilar Castillo and Eric Fernandez Saldana, who live in Mexico City. So Cecilia is a social activist and artist, and Eric is a scholar and academic of international relations. So they did a station in Mexico City, Tijuana, and Acapulco. So in their stations, you would come, and on the ballots, you would vote with fake blood, because why not? And then once you would vote for a candidate, they had these like styrofoam heads representing Trump and Hillary, and it was like your opportunity to vote against the candidates. So you would do that by taking one of those syringes, screws, or Mexican flags and stabbing them in the head. It's pretty funny. And then in Acapulco, they went full on effigies with wooden crosses, which is awesome. And then once you would vote against the candidates, Marianne Sadowski, who also did a station at Plaza de la Raza in LA, printed these birds that say voto libre on the American flag. So like as a souvenir, once you were done voting, you would cut it out and take it. So in Tijuana, after they were done with their station, they gave me a call to tell me that they were tossing over the votes. So in the spirit of freedom, celebration of difference, and fun, at the Hull House, I wanted to create a disco-themed environment. So I knew that I wanted to create a space where it was about celebration and we could dance our protest. So I asked a Chicago artist, Lisa Haller-Bagginson, to collaborate on the installation, and DJ Sadie Rock to create a soundscape where she created a 24-hour playlist of protest songs. And so here we created our own perversion of red, white, and blue, and stars and stripes. So we created these textiles in the language of protest banners, and we used batik to dye the fabrics to highlight an absence, erasure, and resistance. So in this station is where all the ballots were sent, counted, and exhibited. So for those who can't legally vote, Election Day becomes a day where we are invisible and silent, where we get to watch the rest of the country vote. So on this day, rather than staying silent, we decided to take up as much space as possible and to protest and dance in loud celebration. So on this day, we threw multiple parties and events throughout the stations. So here at Jane Addams Hull House, I collaborated with Yvette Mayorga, and we asked participants to create a piñata wall that was collectively built and then collectively bashed later that day. And at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago, with Roberto Sifuentes and DJ Sadie Rock, we created an election viewing party where we had performances, Trump and Hillary piñatas, and a balloon drop in the middle of the museum. Also highlighted in these events was an artwork by Chicago artist Joseph Mora, who created these "If We Could Vote, We Would" wristbands. So in 2 months, we were able to collect more than 2,000 votes, and this was the result. So the official and unofficial voting results were Clinton won by with 1,246 votes, Trump with 148, Stein 92, Johnson 73. Those are write-in section, so 195 people wrote Sanders, maybe 2020. And there were 354 other write-ins with Barack Obama, Michelle Obama on top, and unfortunately Kanye West. But that was before he went extra crazy. So, and there was 74 no votes. So the ballots look like this on the inside. It started out with a phrase, "I'm voting here because," and we translate it in the 5 most spoken languages in Chicago. So what people wrote down in this part of the ballot profoundly moved me and continued to move me. So it ranges from, "I'm voting here because I care," "I'm voting here because I still have hope for democracy," "I'm voting here because I am a kid," "My father could not vote for most of his life because he was an ex-felon," "I'm an immigrant, I cannot vote anywhere here, I'm voting here because I was given the opportunity, and the vote is for a better world where humanity prevails." So I'm currently gearing up for the official and unofficial voting stations for the 2020 presidential elections. So holla at me if you want to do a station. So, of course, we know who won the elections, and protests broke out on November 9th. And in restlessness, I started making protest banners that very day. And I started to put calls on Facebook inviting whoever wanted to learn how to make their own banners to just come over and make them with me. And quickly, more people were interested than my place could accommodate, and at the same time, arts organizations were reaching out to me to do banner making workshops for the public. So the first part of the projects are these free public workshops where people learn how to make their own protest banners in really simple steps using Fusible Web. So I have a tutorial on Facebook and my website if you're interested. And each banner takes an hour and a half to 2 hours to make. And since workshops have been taking place all over the United States and internationally, in addition to the Chicago's Protest Banner Lending Library, I've started a branch in Philadelphia, St. Louis, Boston, Baltimore, Ithaca, and Toronto. So the workshop skills sharing component has become importantly pedagogical. The workshops in the space they create addresses people's immediate desires to create banners for themselves and others to use in protests. It also places the skill of making protest banners in the hands of participants where they have the skills to continue making them for themselves and their communities and for their art practices. And the second part of the project is the physical lending library of these banners. So it quickly turned into a library because many of the people making banners with me are my friends, family, and neighbors of immigrants, many who are non-citizens and undocumented, who fear going to protests and don't feel safe in those spaces. So many of my neighbors fear of violence breaking out or getting arrested, and of course, for those who are undocumented, an arrest can quickly lead to deportation. So in this way, we were making banners, but we couldn't take them out ourselves. So I turned the project into a lending library of these banners where those who feel unsafe going to protests can donate their banners to the library, where others can use to check out to use. So in this way, even if we cannot physically attend a protest, our voices are still heard, and those who check out the banners become allies to these vulnerable communities. And with our collection of banners, we've done several residencies where we have open hours to the public. So in February to May 2017, the Protest Banner Lending Library took on a public residency at the Chicago Cultural Center, where we, Vero, Ishita, and Tabitha and I, opened the library to the public for 24 hours a week for people to come in, make banners, check them out, and return them during those hours. So as part of our residencies and workshops, we often collect slogans and take suggestions for slogans because honestly, this is one of the hardest parts of making a banner. And by the end of our residency at the Chicago Cultural Center, we had more than 6,000 cards. It was really our inspiration wall, and I really enjoyed seeing the conversations develop. It's like watching a physical Facebook thread, right? Give Trump a chance, no. Agreed, double agreed. Triple agreed, quadruple agreed, and I like this series right here, don't be a sore loser, don't be a fucker, and then the one that's under, that's what she said. Anyways, so our residency at the Cultural Center took place during a time where there were just multiple protests happening every week. So this site really became a hub for people to meet and make and check out banners before going to protests. So example here, these women came to make banners before heading to DC for the Native Nations Rise March in March 2017. So once people make their banners, they always have the option of taking it or donating it to the project. What's most important to me is use. So if you're gonna use it, take it. If you can't use it or you want others to use it, then please consider donating it to the lending library. We often have people also make banners, use them, and then donate them to the library after. So fabric banners have some advantages to paper and cardboard, right? Number one, fabric banners are generally easier to transport, so people just can fold them up and throw them in your bag, ready to go. Many people hold them, they put them on dowels, put them on, dowels with zip ties, they wear them as capes and aprons. So the second advantage of fabric is that they last longer than posters and can be reused many, many times. So in this way, it speaks to time. Maybe it's a little pessimistic, but we're gonna be fighting these things for a long time. So we estimate that more than 1,200 banners have been made in our workshops, and we currently have more than 400 banners collectively in all our libraries, and they're constantly being checked out. So when someone does check out a banner, we take down their email address, ask them to use the hashtag protest banner lending library, and we ask people to return it once they're done using it so other people can check it out to use. And when they're returned, we ask people where they've been taken and used. So this is Free Street Theater, and they borrowed banners for their youth production. So they get checked out for protests, marches, political actions, but they also get checked out for conferences, public talks, presentations, performances, retreats, exhibitions, schools, classrooms, fundraiser events, parties, and sometimes people just tell me they put it up in their room. So we don't have a time frame for people to return the banners, and we don't have late fees. So some banners never come back, or they come back damaged, and that's okay because that's all part of protest. And it's also been really interesting to look through media coverage of protests that happen nationwide and how often we find our banners in the photographs. So this was a photo in the news that got widely shared at the Chicago Trans Liberation March. So this is important for me to think about the visual impact of the banners, as well as that I like that people are encountering these artworks in public spaces, on the streets, and on the pages of newspapers. And of course, widely on social media. So the words of these banners have a growing history. They're made by someone, used in a protest, returned to the library, then taken by someone else to a different protest. The banners carry the histories of the hands that hold them and the places where they have traveled. And now that there aren't as many protests happening day to day, the protest banner lending library and its focus has shifted. So instead of making banners to keep up with these public protests, I've been contacting organizations and activists who are doing these important works, constantly fighting and working, and we've been reaching out, making banners and giving them to these organizations and activists to support the work that they're doing. So recently, in December, a bunch of activists took down a bunch of banners to put them up while they were occupying the Tornillo immigrant detention facility. And last summer, I did a month-long residency where Hyde Park Art Center in Chicago sent me to Fries Künstlerhaus in Hamburg, Germany. So during this residency, I worked with Rapfugees, a group of young rappers who use rap as a refuge, and many of its members are refugees, many without legal status, and many even born in Germany with no legal status. So during the workshop, we made banners with lyrics of their rap songs in multiple languages, Dari, Arabic, Somali, Portuguese, and German. And while making, they were freestyling and started to incorporate slogans of my banners into creating new rap lyrics. And so far, I've been fighting to make the statement that we are never, never other. But it is really in these sorts of moments of collective making where I feel that we are the center. That what bonds us is not that we are othered, but that each of us have a unique, alternate vision for the future that embraces, centers, and celebrates our resilience. And we get to create it and share our visions through art and music with each other and the world. But when we're under attack and our safety is compromised, do we even have space to imagine a new world? So lately, I've been thinking more and more about safety and how I can claim protective spaces for immigrants and people of color through my work. So I've been putting the Immigrant Legal Resource Center's red card statements onto curtains to respond to this political climate where more and more people of color are under attack by police and ICE. So these have lately been installed at the entrances and exits of my installation spaces to ward off authorities and to claim protective spaces for myself and my neighbors. So these are statements to ICE and police that say, I do not wish to speak with you, answer your questions, or sign or hand you any documents based on my Fifth Amendment rights. I do not give you permission to enter my home based on my Fourth Amendment rights unless you have a warrant that you slide under the door. I do not give you permission to search any of my belongings based on my Fourth Amendment rights. I choose to exercise my constitutional rights. And once you go into that space, they're filled with Know Your Rights curtain statements in different languages to share this knowledge with my neighbors of how to keep safe. So it says, you have constitutional rights. Do not open the door if an immigration agent is knocking on the door. Do not answer any questions from an immigration agent. If they try to talk to you, you have the right to remain silent. Do not sign anything without first speaking to a lawyer. You have the right to speak with a lawyer. If you are outside of your home, ask the agent if you are free to leave, and if they say yes, leave calmly. So in the installation at Hyde Park Art Center at Chicago, portals to safety, freedom, and power were installed behind the curtains. And these were made with the Art and Restorative Justice Teen Group at Hyde Park Art Center. So we created 3 portals, one for the past, present, and future. So this one is our celebratory future beach scene, where we will be reconnected with the earth and land. And I particularly found this portal to the present moment powerful, where we are up against a brick wall. There's only a sliver of safety, power, and freedom available to us. We're trying to get there, but we're under attack. So even with the Know Your Rights and red card statements, there are risks, especially for brown and black people, to use and assert their constitutional rights to authorities. There's always a fear of retaliation and excessive force, but what other options are there? What's here to protect us doesn't protect us. A system cannot protect those it was never designed to protect. So on a more intimate level, I've been collaborating with Ishita Darop, and we create books and stickers to empower people of color and to fight back against power and structures of oppression, usually whiteness. So this book is called Taking Receipts. It's a log of aggression for people of color. So sadly, as people of color, we encounter discrimination every day. It's exhausting. And when it happens, we're often questioning ourselves, thinking, did that just happen? Am I being too sensitive? Am I reading too much into this? And when we can identify that it's discrimination and we speak to it, we're often questioned, and others often don't believe us or brush us off, calling us too sensitive or angry. And the burden falls on us to prove that we are being discriminated against. So this book is here for you to take detailed logs of your everyday aggressions so you could show off your receipts, proof. So these logs is ideal for working professionals, students, and anyone who feels the annoying twinges of racism on a daily basis. You could use this log in case you decide to file complaints. This log is for incidences of overt and subtle discrimination, microaggression, racism. These can all be perpetrated by an individual, group, and be committed on a systemic level. So that one says, hey, tell me about your family history. Well, one side is white and one side's black, but I don't know much about my black side. Well, maybe if you look at pictures from Africa, you might see someone you recognize. What's wrong? And this one says, I am one of the only people of color at my workplace. They continually spell my name wrong. I've been working there for 6 years. Witnesses, everyone who works there. Parties mauled, everyone who works there. Follow-up, I emailed the administrative assistant to correct it. She averted blame. So every 5 pages, we insert a silly illustration like this one. They're Applehead soccer players that say, morning haters, to keep us laughing, because when we're dealing with heavy shit like discrimination and oppression, you have to find ways to laugh. So Ishita and I call ourselves cute rage. Cute rage is a term where something's so cute, you just want to squish it to death, right? It's often the way I feel about baby sloths. And Ishita and I are Asian femme cuties who are filled with rage, so we are cute rage. And we often ask ourselves, how much can we talk back? Because society brushes us off as cute, petite, model minority Asian girls. How much can we talk back and call out under the safety of our cuteness? We're often told we're really cute when we're mad, so we're going with it and using it to dismantle white supremacy and patriarchy. So we've been making these sticker sheets called Put It On Blast, hashtag call it out and label it, where you could just float through your world and label all the bullshit around you discreetly with these cute stickers. So sticker call-outs range from this is sexist, to this is homophobic, to fake woke, to neoliberal bullshit here, and privilege blind. the hater ones for me. So you could do things like this, right? What? Cultural appropriation. So these stickers we just released 2 weeks ago. So these are our most recent stickers, where that one is put in on blast. Part 2, right? So with things like gentrifier and culture vulture. There's a white mediocrity Band-Aid to fix all your problems. And then this one is a clear sticker sheet of return stolen artifacts, where you can discrete stickers to use in museums and places that house stolen art and artifacts. Apply at your own risk and historical understanding. So I leave you today with one of my favorite Put It on Blast stickers as a friendly reminder to never call the police on Black and brown people for just living. So there's Barbecue Becky right there. Yeah, and I want to end on this. So what it means to be racialized is experience the state not as the institution that guarantees the universal protection of life, but rather as one that is the very agent of death. By Grace Kyung Wong Hong in Death Beyond Disavowal. Thank you.